hope you've had a wonderful time catching up over lunch with a few fellow edupreneurs. Who met someone over lunch that they hadn't met before today? Keep your hands up if that was a good interaction. All right, look at that. Well done. A good lunch. I hope the food was to your liking and that you've really felt you had that chance to connect. Who met more than 2 new people over lunch? Fantastic. Who heard of at least one cool idea that they hadn't heard of before over lunch? Love it. And this is so the networks form. Throughout the session, feel free to just ask someone to be a friend on Facebook. Try to get up over 20 friends or whatever else. Maybe throw a few tweets out on GEL 2010 to try to let other people know about kind of what we're doing in here in the conversation and let that bubble up a little. And as I said this morning, we're kind of going on this journey where we're talking about reimagining education, leading change. And now as we wander in past lunch, we come to the wonderful topic of innovation. And so I just wanted to give you a time to discuss on your tables, why is it that schools have been so resistant to change? Go for it, 20 seconds, have a little discussion. Alrighty, sorry to interrupt your conversation, but I'm really interested in this idea of why schools have stayed so the same. In sociology, they have a term to describe organisations that stay very similar called isomorphism. This tendency for things to become more similar. And places like schools have this tendency, amazingly. If you ask someone, what is a school? And if you do a bit of travel and you ask, what is a school to someone from Sweden or from Denmark and someone from Switzerland, maybe you head across someone from the States or Canada, into Latin America, you'll actually get all these similar things. When you say, hey, I was at school for this many years in my life, people all around the world go, oh, I know that kind of place. I know what happens in those places. I bet you were sitting in a classroom at a desk with someone up the front telling you stuff about the world that's probably not too relevant anymore. Schools have been incredibly resistant to change. How is a classroom meant to be structured? Do we need to have classrooms? When and where does learning occur in a student's life? Is it in the little, as we talked about this morning, the factory little components, 50-minute blocks, move one to another through the conveyor belt of learning? You see, we've been stuck for too long, I think. Stuck in the same ways of thinking, and it's time to break out. And as edupreneurs, it's our role to come up with the next thing. This idea of reimagining the what, the when, the how, and the why of learning, and actually saying that, as Aaron said this morning, we're actually the experts in here. We've got the capacities and the resources to try to work that through, speak to our students, and work out what's the next. But what is innovation? And I think in particular around schools, there's been a sense that innovation just equals technology. And what's amazing is you see pictures of classrooms in the 1970s, and you walk into the front of the classroom, and what's at the front? A blackboard. You get to the 1990s. You walk to the front, same position, a whiteboard. You get to the last 5 years, you walk to the front of a whole row of desks, and you see a smartboard. And we get this sort of incremental change, but it misses the point that things have got to be disruptive, not just incremental. And we've adapted. Schools are incredibly adaptive at not changing too far. They make little adjustments, little incremental changes. But what we need is innovators to start thinking, what is innovation for learning? Innovation could mean technology, but it could also mean a whole new way of structuring the classroom, getting rid of classrooms, new ways of learning, new ways to engage teachers, new ways to attract teachers, new forms of leadership and structured distributed leadership across the school. All these things are innovations, but the point is to get more people learning in ways that they never have before. But sometimes innovation is incremental, and sometimes it is thoroughly disruptive. And I would love to step a little bit into this space over the next hour and a half or so, as we give ourselves license, not just to trade up from a blackboard to a smartboard, but actually think, maybe there are things that haven't been done yet in learning that we could drive. Or maybe there are people out there pushing the boundaries that we could learn from. Maybe there's technology people who are pushing the boundaries that we could adapt and bring in. So let's step out of just incremental and think about disruptive as well. Thinking in both, as I said, people who are change agents at the classroom, the individual level, all the way up to what this might mean at the system level, really shaking stuff up. But what about the sources of innovation? Where does innovation come from? Is it about having a staff room with nice little red cushions? Maybe you can bring your dog to work like you can at Google. Is this the kind of innovation culture that's going to start things up and move things forward? Well, one of the big mega trends, I think, of the last 10 years or so in innovation, particularly in the private sector, is a real opening up. You see, what used to happen is you'd have the people at the top of the organisation, the producers, who get together in a room, people with nice college degrees from different parts of the world, they get together, really, really smart, wear funky glasses and come up with the big ideas. And then those producers sell those big ideas, products, services, down to the consumers who receive them. Thank you very much for meeting my needs. But over the last 5 years, 10 years, things are starting to shift in innovation. Because what's starting to happen is ideas are starting to come from consumers back up to the producers. In fact, most companies now recognise that they've got to have an open innovation strategy. They've got to actually let those who are on the ground let ideas bubble back up and be in a conversation. That the consumers not only not just receive, but they start to design, that they start to give feedback and they start to push forward. And I think perhaps it's time for education to jump in on this, because I think as educators we've been the receivers. Yes, policymaker, what's the next change? What is the next thing that's going to happen? And actually the bottom-up movement is we know what's going on the ground. We understand our people. What are the innovations we want to drive back up the system? But it's not just us who are on the ground. I think there's also huge opportunities for the role of students as well. As we talked about earlier, what students are doing between the hours of 8 and 10 o'clock at night, and then they pretend they've gone to bed, right, and they do a couple of extra hours, is they're using their resources, what Clay Shirky calls their cognitive capacity, their surplus, cognitive surplus that they've got going on, and they're putting it in all different things. They're contributing to blogs, they're sharing on their networks. Could we tap into some of that energy and innovation and bring that as a source of innovation in our schools? And even learning from the extremes. Charles Ledbetter, an innovation expert from the Innovation Unit in London, is really starting to shake things up and say maybe what we need to do in some of the rich countries like Australia is learn from some of the poorest countries. Because when you have lots, it's very hard to be innovative. But when, like Sugatra Mitra is trying to get a way to educate all these kids in slums but he doesn't have teachers, he comes up with an idea of a hole-in-the-wall computer. I don't know whether we would have found that out in Australia, thought about that. And so it's in the extremes, often when we don't have something we can learn. And so opening up, maybe we can learn from Latin America about some of the things. Maybe we can learn from the Northern Territory. In fact, actually we could learn a whole bunch about innovation from some of the people in this room who are working in some of the harder places. And innovation in the end for us is going to be about what works. It's going to be about learning and not structures. And it's going to be about pulling kids into learning and not pushing them into a delivery of learning that we've pre-packaged for them beforehand. But I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm really glad that today we've got a few people for the platform who are going to help us out. And to start off, we're going to hear from Stephen Harris, who is the principal of Northern Beaches Christian School here in Sydney, just 30 minutes north in a beautiful part of the world. But he's an incredible innovator, principal there since 1999, but always thinking about how do we push the boundaries? How do I sort of break out, be that rebel we talked about as an edupreneur? And he started up the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning. And what's been incredible is watching people come from all over the world over the last little while and all over Australia, starting to see someone who's really in that disruptive space. What can we do with learning spaces? What can we do with education to really shift the boundaries? And it's my great pleasure to introduce him now to share with us about the work he's doing. So would you please make him feel very welcome.